Welcome to my Harris versus DeSantis summer updated prediction. And there we go. And now for the likely states for both parties. I'm gonna start with Colorado, so I think it would stay the same. Not much would happen. It would probably drop to like 10, 11%. Even with Harris, who's not the greatest nominee out there, it would still go Democrat, of course. New Mexico, it would drop to around 9 to 8%. She might do slightly worse with Hispanics, but it wouldn't be too much of an issue in this state. And let me go to the next one. So let me talk about Iowa. With someone like Ron DeSantis, Iowa and Ohio would do better in my opinion than it did in 2020. You would probably look at these states and see them go to like 9% or even 10% in this scenario between Ron DeSantis against Harris. And Alaska, it would probably rebound to around 11%, maybe 12%. Coming to think about it, I'm going to put it as a safe state since my new categories for the safe states are 12 plus, and with DeSantis that would probably go up. And Alaska would become a safe state once again. And before I forget, I'm going to put Maine at large as a likely since that would be how things would turn out like. And lastly, Virginia. No matter what happens, whether you put a bad Democratic candidate, it's always going to vote Democrat since due to the fact that the suburbs in Virginia are so heavily left that it's just going to carry the whole state. Okay, sorry about that. So, for the next following states, for Florida, it would be a likely state under Ron DeSantis since he's a really popular governor from this state and he would have better suburban appeal. Also, since it's his home state, he would get a home state advantage and would get a boost, and he could see Florida go to like a 5, just barely to a likely state. This scenario between him and Harris, since Harris would lose support most likely in the South, most likely lose support from centrist voters or suburban voters. And Texas, Ron DeSantis would do really well. He would keep the state as a likely. He would make gains and rebound the state back to like something around 7% to 9%. That's my prediction of what would happen with Ron DeSantis. His suburban appeal would be really good and he would make really good gains with Hispanics and really overall with everyone, since he's what I call a Goldilocks Republican. And he's really good with Trump fans and would also do good with establishment people. And Harris would not be able to make really any gains here, maybe within African Americans, but that just would not be enough for her. And that's it for the likely states. Moving on to the next states. So for the lean states, let me start with Minnesota. So Minnesota would be a lean state for Harris still because of how much the city's grip has on the state. Ron DeSantis would of course make gains, as I've said before, with many voters in the suburban areas, but Harris' appeal would just not be good enough. She's really underperforming many people's expectations, and people's expectations will not change until soon or even until 2024. And I expect the state to be a lean around 3 to 4 points. And now for New Hampshire, which would be a lean state, as I've said before, similar to Minnesota, it would drop to around 2 to 4%. Harris would just not do well in this section of the country. And before I forget, Maine 2nd District would of course be a likely state, or I should say likely district. And yeah, New Hampshire would just not do as well as it did in 2020. And Harris would still win the state, but by a lesser margin. And let me move on to North Carolina. So North Carolina would be really interesting. Harris would gain slight support within African Americans, but Ron DeSantis would overall just gain a lot of voters from a lot of demographics within whites, within suburban appeal would be really good for him. And overall, this would probably swing the state to the right. 3 to 4 points would probably be where we find the state to be in 2024 between Harris versus Ron DeSantis. And yeah, and as you can see, before we go to the tilt states, Harris has 225 while Ron DeSantis has 235. And let me start with these states. So for Arizona, Ron DeSantis would win here by a tilt margin, less than 1%, since Arizona is a really interesting state. Biden barely won it, and I doubt Harris would win here, since Ron DeSantis would do better the suburbs. He would do way better with the anti-Trump Republicans, since he's not Trump, and he would do better with more centrist voters and McCain fans, and the Romney and the Bush voters would really like someone like Ron DeSantis due to him being a Goldilocks Republican. And I don't see a way that Harris would be able to win against Ron DeSantis in Arizona. Maybe against Trump if she plays her cards right, but even then I doubt. And I think Ron DeSantis would win here by 0.9, maybe even a lean margin. And let me move on to Wisconsin. So it would probably, you know what? I think it would actually be a lean state in this scenario. Hear me out. So Ron DeSantis would do way better than what Trump did in 2020 with suburbanites, Hispanics, whites, college-educated voters. He would do way better with. And with the minority population of Wisconsin slowly moving to the south, and this would give other demographics a much bigger power grab in the state. And with Harris having really low turnout with all demographics around Democrats almost, due to her being more leftist than Biden, she would lose a lot of those conservocrats, and I do think DeSantis would probably win the state because of how much the lower turnout Harris would have from Democrats. And now I'm going to move on to Michigan. So, Michigan is a pretty interesting state. And I just don't see a way in which Democrats can lose here unless things really go bad for them. It went to Biden by almost 3% in 2020. And Harris would win here because of the African American population, how big it is in this state, and it would take a lot for Ron DeSantis to somehow win in Michigan. And yeah, I believe that Michigan would go to Harris. And for the last 3 states, so I'm going to go with Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania would be a tilt state. And as I said before, with Ron DeSantis being a way better candidate, in my opinion, than Trump himself, the anti-Trump movement that Democrats got, the anti-Trump turnout would be way less. Ron DeSantis would be way more appealing to centrist, suburban voters, and many more, Hispanics, etc. And Pennsylvania was basically Biden's home state, which is why he got a boost technically from this state. And without him on the ticket, I think Ron DeSantis would win here by around 0.5%. And let me go to Georgia. It could easily be a toss-up. Harris could win here also. But because Ron DeSantis is from the South, he would get a trickle-down support from Southerners, and because he would get way more from the white vote, and which Trump lost a bit from 2016 to 2020. He would gain from that. He would gain from suburbanites. And lastly, he's just more appealing at the end of the day. And Harris would lose those conservocrats that she really needs, that Biden was able to. Those anti-Trump voters would go to Ron DeSantis. Not all of them, but a decent majority of them would go to Ron DeSantis. And I'm going to talk about Maine 2nd District. Many people don't realize that it's going to get redistricted. And from what I've seen, it's either going to be like Biden +1, worst case scenario. And I just don't see Harris being able to get somewhere near to what Biden got in the 2nd District of Nebraska. And lastly, for Nevada, it's really interesting. So Nevada's always been one of those weak states that's always out of the hands of the GOP, and it's always like 2.4% for the Democrats. And with the DSA here potentially really messing things up, there's really a lot that DeSantis can gain here from the Democrats. And with lower support that Harris would have from these centrist Democrats, with the gains that Ron DeSantis would make within Hispanics, Cubans, all these anti-socialist voters that just vote for the GOP, the only thing that Ron DeSantis would have to do would to label her as a socialist, and she is more left-wing than Biden, but DeSantis would gain here from that demographic. And the combined support from suburbanites and more white voters, and as I've said before, the fact that he's way more appealing than what Trump is, the anti-Trump voters would go to Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis would win here by 0.25%. Because of the lower turnout that Harris would have among Democrats. And yeah, as you can see, Harris would win 240 electoral votes against Ron DeSantis at 298. Subscribe, like, and share. This was my Harris versus DeSantis summer updated prediction. See ya, and bye.